Hello and welcome to another plus-sized kite review, where in today's edit I will be covering the latest from Ozone kiteboarding with the Reflex. First off, as usual, thanks to Ozone and our local Ozone retailer here in Auckland, the New Zealand board store, for providing these demos, and of course, as always, to Mac Kiteboarding for the majority of the other gear you'll see me riding to compare in this review. Now, as I understand it, the Reflex is effectively Ozone's purely Dacron version of the Vortex. Both are 3-strut freeride kites that do a bit of everything. But I would say, based on my experience, the major focus for this model is general rider progression, and in particular big air rider and riding progression, which is great for me, of course, because that is what I generally focus on these reviews. Like I did with the Vortex, I was lucky enough to test this kite in both 9 and 12 meter sizes, in winds ranging from as little as 18 knots on the 12 up to around 30 knots on the 9. Because of the similarities to the Vortex, I would highly recommend checking out my recent review on the V2 version, which adds an Aluula frame to the equation. So, as you would expect, also comes with a large bump in price and performance. I would also recommend checking out the recent reviews on the Duotone Evo SLS, as I would have to say, of the brands on the market, that this is probably the overall closest kite to the Reflex of the kites I've tried and tested, at least recently. So, for those, however, who haven't seen the previous reviews, I'll just start with a broad refresh of how I feel Aluula relates to this type of kite and kites in general. As personally, the guys I test with and I find Aluula usually does its best work in terms of overall performance boost and return on investment with 3-strut kites. We've found that it has the potential, with the right design, to add a noticeable combination of more power, stability, hang time, responsiveness, and speed that takes what in the Dacron version can be a very solid, predictable, enjoyable kite like this Reflex, which is going to be good for most riders to progress on and have a fun time doing so, and with the Aluula brings it up into the realm of the top performing kites on the market, suitable for pro-level competition riding. So the reason I mention all of this is because for the bulk of this review, I will effectively be describing a similar overall style of kite to the Vortex, but repeatedly saying that it is just going to be a little bit less in all of those categories overall, perhaps 10 to 20%, depending on the rider level, the size of the kite, and of course the conditions they are using it in. So, knowing this going in, I already had a fairly good idea of what to expect from this Reflex, but of course you never know for sure until you get the thing in the air. And thankfully, from our very first flight, I can say that I was very happy to find the Reflex does an excellent job of making the most of what you'd hope for with this style of kite. Once the bar is in your hand and the kite is in the air, you'd probably describe the bar pressure as perhaps being somewhere in the medium to heavier side, with the steering pressure being a little closer to the heavier side, meaning noticeably more so than its Aluula counterpart, but not as much as, say, the other similar kite from Ozone, the Edge VT, which I reviewed not long ago, and is a more boosty 5-strut version. The responsiveness on this Reflex is quite decent, again good for a Dacron kite, but obviously significantly less than its Aluula counterpart. The Reflex flies at a decent pace with speed that I would describe as very manageable, particularly for progressing riders, and although it's not particularly fast around the window, it's not a bad looper, and like the Evo, it does have quite good power for a 3-strut kite. Overall, the kite just seems to sit in a very nice sweet spot where it kind of does everything well, enough to keep you out of trouble if you are progressing, but does offer enough for a more advanced rider to generally have a good time and do some big sending in the right conditions. Like the Edge, it is also quite stable, which makes it really easy to progress with tricks like rotations and board offs when you are just parking the kite above your head and are not cranking on the bar too much. Getting into the key categories, starting with boosting and hang time. As I mentioned, it is a quite solid booster for a 3-strut kite, and because it is not too fast, it is fairly easy to hit the sweet spot when you send it. We didn't feel the sheet and go power or explosiveness off the water was at quite the level of kites like the Evo or Rebel, or even the Edge, but not too far behind, with boosting potential similar to popular 5-strut big air kites like the latest version of the North Orbit or the Fly Surfer Era 2. The difference between those last two kites and this Reflex, however, would be that we find as the Reflex is slightly slower, but it has a little bit more power, so it's easier to more consistently boost high on. So again, for progressing riders in particular, I think they'd be likely to go higher more consistently on this Reflex because it is a bit easier to time. And you're also going to benefit from the better hang time. So softer landings are more likely, and coming down without overpiloting the kite like you might on an Orbit or Era. Naturally, it wouldn't compare to any of the big Aluula boosters, and when I rode it back to back with the Vortex, it was obvious as soon as we swapped kites that the Vortex just felt lighter on the bar, easier to maneuver. As soon as you sent it to 12, you exploded far more aggressively off the water and caught more lift and gusts as you flew up. But how much exactly is, of course, hard to say. And I would say of the sessions we rode it back to back, we were probably jumping about 10 to 15% higher on average per jump in wind that allowed us to jump up to around the 15 to 18 meter mark. That said, some of our top jumps on the Reflex were comparable to the top jumps on the Vortex. More importantly, though, the Vortex being lighter and faster just meant it was less work. It was easier on the bar, and although for the first, say, 15 to 20 minutes, I did find it a bit trickier to control, having come from the slower Reflex, which is so plug-and-play easy to use. So once again, that just says to me a lot of riders are going to benefit from the easier to track and control speed of the Reflex, particularly in stronger winds and smaller kite sizes. Now, moving on to looping, this is one area where my friends and I had the most disagreement, or at least the biggest variation in our experience. In each of the sessions that I was testing the 9, although the kite is a little slower, a little less responsive, and sits a bit deeper in the window than most of the big air kites we've ridden recently, I found the loops quite easy and very predictable, to a point that I never found myself getting hung out to dry by the kite. I never crashed any straight loops in either direction, and I didn't find that it stalled on me at all after the loop, which is always nice to know you're going to get a clean catch. My friends, however, on the other hand, were finding the loop itself was easy to pilot through, but on occasion were finding their catch on the end of that loop a little bit more challenging to time. We were trying to analyze what this was, but the best we could come up with was just a technique difference, as they have been riding a lot more faster, higher angled loopers like the Orbits and kites of that nature lately, and with this Reflex, they perhaps weren't continuing to pilot the loop all the way through and off to the side, so they weren't quite getting the same catch and lift on the way back down. Because this Reflex, although it does go around smoothly, it's not going to shoot up to 12 quite as quickly, so you just have to be a little bit more mindful of it as you pilot it all the way through the loop, and as it goes back up to 12, you redirect it off to the side. I, of course, have spent a little bit more time on such a wide variety of kites lately, as I've been testing obviously all the kites for these videos, and not all my friends have been part of each one of them. And I've gotten into the habit of completing the loop more aggressively and being sure to send the kite off to the sides with every loop, just to ensure that I'm catching and the loops for the helis are passing over 12 each time. Some kites can let you get away with just letting the bar out and letting it go up to 12. Others, like this Reflex, just require a little bit more active piloting. So if you are just letting the bar out and allowing the kite to go to 12 after your kite loop, you do stand a small risk because it doesn't always ensure that the catching will be as consistent, and it's not going to guarantee the kite will go over 12 as you pull the bar back in and redirect it. Now, because of its bar pressure and slower speed, like with the Evos, although I found the Reflex quite an easy kite to loop myself, it would not be one of the top kites that I would recommend first-time loopers to start their kite loop journey on, at least with larger sizes, say 9 or 10 meters up and above. But it's certainly a kite that you can learn to loop on if you are taking the right steps to get there and have specifically made sure to master your heli loops and get started with consistent baby loops first. A slightly slower looping kite like this will just mean that you will have to make a bigger jump from baby loops to a good safe height to get your first proper powered loop and catch, perhaps around the 5 to 6 meter mark. This is because your margin for error will be slightly smaller than the type of loop-friendly kite that will pivot on itself a bit more and complete a higher and tighter loop, such as the Comprita Nitro, Fly Surfer Era, Orbit, and of course most of the Brainchild kites. Now, where this kite should have an advantage over those other kites is that once you have got the kite around to get it back up over your head, the added lift it offers will mean you are landing smoother and softer once your technique is on point, and you'll be less likely to screw up over piloting like you will on a very fast kite when coming down from those higher heights. So when moving on to confidence building, because this kite is very manageable right from beginner level, it will be a great option for most riders. However, if your focus is specifically on loop progression, that heavier bar pressure and slightly slower, more technical loop is just going to take a little bit more getting used to feel confident blasting it around the window your first few times. But that will translate to learning better technique as well. As I've mentioned before in videos, where in the past when I was more loop progression focused, my favorite styles of kites were always things like the Orbits Nitros and the other really easy loopers. But as I have progressed and find everything pretty manageable to loop these days, I now tend to find a bit more interest in airstyle friendly, bigger boosting and hang time style kites. And this Reflex has more of that DNA while also being very easy to use. Kites like this are some of the few on the market that I think you can recommend for riders taking their first lessons and going all the way up to more advanced big air progression and general free riding. Now, if I was planning my own Ozone quiver and wasn't looking to splash on Aluula, I'd still go for the Edge in the smaller sizes, say 7 and 8, for the top end sessions, but then I'd pretty much be on the Reflex from sizes 9 and up. Because I get asked this question from time to time, if I was only picking one size to start with my upgrade to Aluula. Personally, I would start with my larger size in the quiver, like an 11 or 12 meter, because that is the kite size that I would get the most use of here in New Zealand. And you want to make sure you're getting the most water time on the gear you spent the most money on. Also, in the larger sizes for progressing riders, the Aluula won't be as hard to handle, and they'll benefit obviously from the hang time and wind range more so. So there you have it, another great kite from Ozone and another review in the bag. Thank you so much for making it this far, and please be sure to like and subscribe, and share this review in your local pages and friend groups. There are some great kite reviews on the way that a lot of people have been asking for months, that I'm so stoked to finally have access to those kites. So be sure to follow me on Instagram if you want a sneak peek of what they are. But until the next video, I hope it's windy wherever you are, and until the next time, goodbye.